We are now turning to land from above. So we'll hear all about the incredibly sophisticated technology at our disposal to sort of have a dashboard on the planet. We're joined by Jeff Allenby from the Center for Geospatial Solutions and Peter Colohan from the Internet of Water Initiative. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you. If possible, I'd love to get our slides up. Thank you. So I'm Jeff Allenby. I'm the Director of Geospatial Technology at the Center for Geospatial Solutions, a new center that Lincoln started almost 2 years ago, which is crazy to think about. But really focused on using the power of GIS and technology to improve land management, conservation decisions, and really make sure that partners of all sizes have access to this really advanced technology. It's a really cool opportunity to be able to look at addressing large-scale challenges both within the US as well as globally. And one of the most profound things is the availability of data is just increasing on a daily basis. The challenge, though, that remains is being able to translate that data into actionable insights on the ground, or being able to, in the journalist case, really be able to tell a story about what has changed, being able to quantify that, have metrics and numbers behind it, and also really be able to provide that narrative to the general public, whether it's from a small land trust saying this is what we did, to being able to track deforestation in the Amazon, or Arctic regions thawing, as we heard earlier. Having those numbers and those maps is really helpful. I inherently am a map geek, so I do have a presentation. There's not a lot of words. This next slide is the only one with words, really. But this was a project that Mac, actually, Lincoln's president, asked me to start thinking about as we start to get into issues around climate change around the globe, as we look at the 30 by 30 movement, protecting 30% of the planet by 2030. What does that look like? And how do we really start to break down barriers between different ways that certain groups or certain people are thinking about it? You have biodiversity, you have climate resilience, you have agricultural productivity, you have, carbon sequestration, and something that really is missed in a lot of cases is equity and access and the people aspect of that. And so what we did is we put together a way to think about how do you bring all of these together through maps and really be able to understand what we're calling consensus landscapes, landscapes that are persistently important regardless of what you're looking at it for. Now, through this, we took a number of different data sets. I know Mark Anderson was here yesterday from the Nature Conservancy. His map is up there on the top left. But also looking at some really amazing data sets that are available. One is the map of biodiversity importance from NatureServe, which looks at the ability of landscapes to have different rare, threatened, endangered species on them across the United States. In the bottom right, we have a carbon data set, carbon sequestration above and below ground, biomass and soil organic carbon. This is actually a subset from an international global data set as well. So all of these data, some are more domestically related, but what we try to do is create a framework where you can kind of sub in other layers to be able to look at that. And then in the bottom left is actually looking at USDA information around farmland classification. And this is actually an inverse. So looking at how do we keep productive farmland farmed, but how do we look at marginal farmland that might require drainage or irrigation or soil supplements or whatever to be productive. Those might be opportunities where you could look at more natural land management to provide habitat corridors and stuff like that. And then overlaying all of that, we used a new data set from the University of Michigan called the Multidimensional Index of Deep Disadvantage, which really looks at a number of different information on its own, but looking at health outcomes, looking at economics, and looking at social capacity to look at communities of deep disadvantage. And the idea here is that typically conservation happens in areas that are wealthier. You have to have that ability to put land aside. And typically with federal funding or state funding programs, communities need to have a certain ability to apply for that funding to be able to get it, to be able to put land away. And what we did is we kind of reclassified all of these different data sets to create a national map that is focused on the most important landscapes across the continental US. And this is looking at the highest overlap between those 5 different categories to be able to go in and be able to say across the country, if we were to protect 30% of the country, what would that 30% look like? And in this case, the red is the top 10%, so the most important landscapes, and the yellow is the top 30%. Now, I want to make sure that I say this is not necessarily the one map to rule them all and the right map. This is my map based on how I looked at it and how I prioritized it. This is my map. But the cool thing about the framework that we developed was you can zoom in and be able to say this is the top 30% of the country. But if you wanted to look at Dorchester County, Maryland, you could look at those same thresholds and say what's the most important 30% of Dorchester County? Or if you're working with a local land trust, what's the most important part of my land trust? And be able to use these same data sets just to find your 30%. Because one of the challenges we saw is that when you have this national dialogue and say, we want to focus on the most important 30% of the country, inherently 70% of the country is left out. And it basically says, you don't matter, which is not right. Like there's value everywhere you go. It may not be the national value, but it's your value. And what we really want to do is empower those local partners to be able to find those landscapes and help protect those landscapes. Another just fun map, I call this my Technicolor dream map. This is looking at, it's called a trivariate map, where you're actually looking at the red, green, and blue in the picture represents the biodiversity, the carbon, and the resilience metrics. So areas like in the southwest, where you have more of those yellowish colors, that's a mix between biodiversity and resilience and connectivity. You don't have high carbon stocks there because it's a desert. There's nothing green. Meanwhile, if you look up in New England, you see more of those blue to kind of teal color. That's where you have high carbon and resilience, but lower biodiversity values. And what this is important about is to be able to say you're not going to have single management goals across the country. It's going to be very regional. You know, different people, different parts of the country are going to care about different outcomes. That's not wrong. Here's how you can divide and conquer by having different partners focus on different things. Another interesting part of the narrative is looking at, if you just look at the pure metrics across the United States, currently we are a little under 13% of the country is counted as conserved. And the USGS has definitions for what counts as conserved. It has to be explicitly for biodiversity management and other things. If you look at just the continental US, that number actually drops to about 8.5%. So the goal is 30%. We're currently at 8.5%. We have 8 years to make up 24%, 23.5%, which seems really insurmountable until you start to look at gap status 3 and 4, which is owned by federal government, state government, other state agencies, conservation easements, but isn't explicitly managed for biodiversity, already makes up about 21% of the continental US, but it's not counted. And that is a really important aspect because, you know, initially everyone's like, well, let's just take all this orange, which is Bureau of Land Management land, and say that counts now. It doesn't always have the value. You're going to have a lot of political issues on that. But what we really want to start to do is look at some of those management opportunities to be able to say, of that subset, what is in that top 30% across the country? So it's not all BLM land. About 10% of the continental US is all of a sudden, you know, off limits for grazing and other resources. Is to say, how do we focus on the most important landscapes? But it's about 160 million acres across the United States, which would about double the amount of land conservation that we have as counted from about 8.5% to about 16.5%. Look at the other, 65% of the country, which is privately owned, has no land protection. You can also do that same analysis and identify the most important private landscapes for conservation. And you can see it's a lot in the East Coast. And it's again about another 262 million acres across the country, which is a really big number, especially when you start to think about the dollar amounts associated with that. But what you can start to do is say, here is, and combine it all. In this map, the green is already protected counts. That's about the 8.5%. The orange and yellow is primarily in the western landscape. That's where you might have management transitions. And then the East Coast is really looking at private land conservation. And this is important because not all of this land is necessarily going to be bought and conserved. I think what we really need to do is have those conversations about how can land be sustainably managed, even if it doesn't have a traditional or formal land conservation designation behind it. Because private land ownership, things through conservation easements, increasingly are seeing like carbon sequestration easements where it might be a 50 or 100-year term. The USDA has a new, what they call their Clear 30 program, which is a 30-year conservation easement, where you're starting to see real environmental outcomes, even though it's time-bound. And from a traditional management perspective, that's a nightmare because it's like what counts, what doesn't, when's it coming on the ledger, when's it going off the ledger. But what we're seeing is advent of new technology that's going to make this a lot easier, particularly looking at satellite imagery, where you can get a more dynamic understanding of what's going on across the landscape. And that's kind of the second half of my presentation. The first half is a lot of fun maps and all the stuff that we did. The second half is really looking more at, okay, so how do we actually manage this land effectively for conservation? And the answer is satellites and AI are your friend. There's a lot of great data sets that are coming out. If you haven't checked out Global Forest Watch from World Resources Institute, this is a global data set that has 30-meter resolution of forest loss from 2012 until now. Through things the government of Sweden has also funded them to do alerts in the tropics, where they have weekly alerts for deforestation at a 30-meter resolution, where just you literally get a text message on your phone saying you have forest loss in an area that you care about, which is really cool to be able to see that. And as companies like Planet Labs, Maxar, Airbus have increasingly, Planet has daily coverage globally at a 3-meter resolution, where every square meter of the planet is imaged every day, and that imagery is available. You have to pay for it, which is the downside. But they're looking at other models to get like monthly base maps that are more useful from a management basis. And a lot of that information is being fed into things like Global Forest Watch. Another advent that we've really seen over the last couple of years, how many people here have seen like the Johns Hopkins COVID-19 dashboard? Everyone has, because it's like the most incredible thing that has really come out of COVID, which is terrible, is really looking at the value of sharing information and making it easily accessible. The same technology that is underlying the Johns Hopkins dashboard is available to anyone. It's a product from Esri, who's a big GIS company. But you can go and create dashboards and make really easily accessible information. This is one that I pulled up today, which is the Bureau of Land Management's California Wildfire Dashboard, but also has information across the country around active wildfires and where are they. You know, this is a data set that is now being streamed into the world that you can pull in. And, you know, Peter's going to talk a lot about the water side of things as well. But increasingly, environmental data is being open, accessible, shareable, and being able to be pulled into kind of multi-dimensional platforms where traditionally you've had these silos where you can only look at your data within your data's context. And increasingly what we're seeing is the ability to smash data together from 6 different ways and be able to get really powerful insights coming out of that. Another one is looking at things like, now that we have satellite archives, this is showing Sentinel-2, which is a European Space Agency product. But this is a project between Esri Impact Observatory and Microsoft's Planetary Computer, where they're doing global 10-meter land cover on a yearly basis. It's just the products is there and the underlying models that you can use to do your own whenever you want. So you can start to track development. This is deforestation in the Amazon, where you can see deforestation happening on a yearly basis. But really being able to do that kind of increased detailed analysis, and it's accessible to anyone, which is just a really cool aspect to it. Planet, who I mentioned earlier as well, has the ability to do that daily overflights, but also looking at some of the different products. This is showing 2 examples. One is a reservoir out in California. The other is illegal gold mining down in Peru, where you can actually see, in real time, what is the difference, be able to calculate what is the difference, to be able to go through either in areas that you care about, to be able to get that imagery timeline and show that before and after, to kind of like really have that dramatic image between the two. But increasingly what Planet's also working on is leveraging AI for tipping and queuing, to being able to say, as the imagery comes in, run a base analysis on it and tell me what's changed. So this is a map showing development in China over a 2-year period. But this is all AI-driven analysis to show new building footprints. Completely automatically from the imagery, it comes in, it's analyzed, and people actually now have kind of that data as a service where they can sign up for a product and say, just show me new building, what's going on or how that's changing. And increasingly, I think you're going to see these type of products. Typically the imagery companies have been saying, here's my imagery, you do something with it. What they're seeing the value now is the derived products coming out, and that's going to be a big part of their business model going forward in the next 5 to 10 years, is people want that processed imagery coming out of it. With that and kind of combining, you also see increase in kind of the democratization of data. And this is making the derived products more accessible, but the fact that I can pull it up on a cell phone and be able to see that while I'm out in the field, or collect information in the field and automatically have it synced back up to kind of a system, I think is where you're going to see a lot of opportunities as well to be able to, for lack of a better word, crowdsource all of that information and bring it back together. That's a very quick overview. I don't even know if it was 15 minutes. I talk fast sometimes.
You did good.
But I want to hand it off to my colleague, Peter.
All right. Okay. So the Internet of Water. So first of all, thank you very much for hanging in here to this final moment, and to handle data and technology at the end is sort of really brave of you. So thank you for doing that. I'll start by saying that I'm going to make a few remarks before I show you my slides to tell you what the Internet of Water is. But what you'll hear me say throughout what I'm about to say is two things: people and data. They are inseparable from one another in this conversation. I myself am a social scientist. Most people think I'm a technologist. But when I started the Internet of Water project at Duke with the founder of the Internet of Water, Martin Doyle, he recruited me because I was a social scientist. And that's an extremely important point. Data without people is devoid of meaning and devoid of any power. I can create a Google map that allowed me to walk to the Charles Hotel from here, or from the Charles Hotel back to here in the first place. But I had to do the walking. The map doesn't make me walk. The map just tells me what to do. So it's very important we remember that. The data is meaningless without the people. Also, people today working without data are guessing. They're guessing. They're shooting from the hip. And the environment is something we can understand and measure. And like flying an airplane, would you rather the pilot fly without any instruments at all and just guess? And maybe do well on instinct based on his previous experience or her previous experience and her knowledge of the terrain. But aren't you glad that she has some instruments? This is the power of data. We have modern data technologies, and we need to apply them to the environment and to these pressing questions. And the core reason for the advent of the Internet of Water is that we don't. And that is why philanthropy has invested in this concept of an Internet of Water, so that we can then begin partnering with public agencies to begin creating this public good around water data. So first, the importance of maps and geospatial data can't be overstated. As Jeff's presentation revealed, the name of our session is called Land from Above. So that refers not only to remote sensing from satellites or airborne drones or something like that, it also refers to the perspective that a map provides. The reason that maps are so powerful is that they create the bird's eye view. That's what gives them their sort of energy, right? And that's why news organizations like you are frequently, increasingly turning to maps to talk about what's happening, because it places people in context they understand. Land and water are intimately tied. We cannot deal with one without the other. They are in a constant ballet. They are understood geologically and hydrologically. Water and land are scientifically intimately related. Water and land policy are intimately related. It's very difficult to separate them. You need to manage water resources to preserve biodiversity, and you have to manage biodiversity and riparian buffer zones for rivers to protect rivers, just to name two examples. Also, water is one of the principal ways that we will experience climate change. It's the delivery vehicle of climate change. Water and heat are sort of the two ways we as humans will experience it. And heat makes every water problem worse. And that's important to bear in mind. And finally, the last thing I want to say as an opening point is that we are in a very modern age of information, and very new. Your iPhone, your smartphone, was introduced in 2007. And open source technology was introduced in about 2009. So we're really only talking about the last 12 years or so of human existence that we've had the sum of human knowledge at our fingertips. And my friend has a great joke about this, which is, I hold in my pocket a device that contains the sum of human knowledge, or gives me access to the sum of human knowledge. I use it to look at cat videos and get into arguments with strangers. So when we think about like how we use this technology, and think about your children, and think about everyone you see on the subway or the bus. There is an overwhelming kind of growing dependency on this technology. And I think we all recognize that. And it's a little bit alarming in one way, right? But it is also extraordinarily powerful. And the extraordinary power of this kind of device and this kind of delivery of information really cannot be overstated. So it's vital that you be able to get water data on your phone. And you really can't today. If you Google water data for the Charles River, you will find out about, if you say Charles River information, you will find out about like a hot dog stand near the Charles River. You will not find out about the Charles River. So why is that true? That is true because public agencies do not manage water data today in a very modern way. Weather data is managed in a very modern way. That's why you can get a weather forecast so quickly. The weather data is managed in a modern way because there's a very powerful commercial business model for that information. So there's a draw from the Weather Channel, from the weather derivatives markets to get that information. The same is true of energy data. There is a draw for that data from the market. Water data, not so much. There's no real eyeballs business, and it's sort of hard to derive money from it. Now, we could picture a future in which you could, from the analytics that comes on top of the water data. But the foundational management of water data has not proven to be profitable for anyone. So it falls to the public sector. So here we are in the public sector handling everything from every range of public policy question that we've discussed today. And one really important, somewhat small but very important problem is the water data that we're trying to manage. So we're creating the Internet of Water to help address that problem. So what is the Internet of Water? So we want, at the Center for Geospatial Solutions, to help partners ask the right questions and transform the right data into actionable insights. And the Internet of Water is a vital piece of that. So what is it? It's a set of principles and a philosophy. It's a philanthropic project today. And it's an emerging federal partnership with federal agencies. So what is our philosophy and our principles? The principles are basically boiled. We have 10 principles you can find on the Internet of Water website, which is created by and managed by Duke. But we can boil them down to these 4 points, which is that water data should be discoverable, accessible, and usable, right? And it should be discoverable. What we mean by that is I should be able to find it without knowing that about the Army Corps of Engineers portal or about the World Resources portal or any other of these portals. I should be able to find this data without knowing about portals. When I get to that portal, it should be accessible to me, meaning I should be able to download it and I should be able to use it in my own decision-making context. If we are able to do that, then we will derive new information and insights from this data. This will improve decision-making in the water data community. Jeff Allenby, people like Jeff who are pulling data together, they will have far more access to data if we're successful, and then the maps will become richer and richer. Then this leads us to better water management outcomes, which leads us to healthy communities and ecosystems. Okay, so how are we going about this? We're going about this with place-based projects. This takes us back to the people. So nobody cares about your software, not even your mother. I told Trish this joke the other night. Nobody cares. And nobody, no expert should ever show up into a community, and you've heard other of our colleagues say this, and say, hi, I'm the expert. I have a piece of technology for you. Would you like it? Bye. That's the answer you will get. I'm not interested, right? So what we do is slightly different. What we say is, hi, we're technologists. We're here to help you. We have no idea what your problem is. We have no idea. But we're here to ask you about your water problem. And then they say, oh, well, the problem is we just don't understand. During droughts, the utilities do not understand the water supply conditions for, out 4 days. Okay. So Dr. Lauren Patterson, one of the co-founders of the Internet of Water, created this dashboard that pulled together all the sources of data relating to water supply for a given set of utilities. And what we did was first listen to the questions that they had. And she pulled the data that answered those questions. That's how you do it. You find out what they want, then you answer their question, not the one you're interested in. This is actually really counterintuitive for the scientific community, because the scientific community focuses on exploratory questions. So listening to the user. So we created this map for water supply dashboard where in North Carolina, utilities share demand, conservation status, and other data relative to water supply. This was so successful that the state climatologists decided to take it on. So they're going to use it now as a resource for the state, for all utilities, to help manage water, to understand water supply conditions and manage towards them. In the Pecos River in New Mexico, one of the central challenges that the Pecos Valley Artisan Conservation District, which is an irrigation district for this very productive agricultural region, they use Pecos River surface water to irrigate farms. But in addition, there are groundwater pumping wells in the basin, as you can see highlighted in that map. And the problem is those wells, the data from those wells, was not publicly available and not published in a modern way. So the surface water managers, so as folks are pumping from those wells, they're pulling down the water that actually acts as a draw on the surface water, those of you who understand hydrology. And it's changing the flow of the river. But they don't know by how much, because they don't know how much pumping is happening in those wells. So what we did was we created a way where they could get automated data from those wells. So instead of waiting 3 months or getting a phone call from the well managers, was sort of how this stuff goes now. And clipboards and pencils and paper. Now, as we're going through this project, which is co-funded by the Bureau of Reclamation, now these irrigation managers have ready access to this well data, and they can see in advance. And before, as they were managing the flows on the Pecos, this led eventually to lawsuits between New Mexico and Texas over this river. So managing these flows properly is extremely important matter. You have to really manage every drop. So knowing how much is being drawn at any given time is vital. Finally, this is an example we did in California with freshwater harmful algal blooms. If you're not familiar with what they are those toxic blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, that kill dogs if it's in serious and can really be harmful to people and animals. And also, they interfere with more than just what we might say are recreational activities. In this example, we worked with the Karuk tribe and the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians, along with these other community science groups, Keep Tahoe Blue, the Watershed Project, and Restore the Delta. But for the tribes, they didn't have just recreational use of the water. They had a tribal use, ceremony. Well, you can't, the tribe it's really profoundly arrogant to sort of insist that a tribe not perform its ceremony because there's a harmful algal bloom. Even though that's been done for centuries. But for the human health of the tribe, of course, the tribal leaders took that into account and they didn't perform their ceremony. But that's terribly intrusive, into their culture. And what they were saying is more information about Clear Lake would be better. So the state of California created this program where they had a monitoring system of their own. But what our system allowed them to do was to take in information from the tribe and to take in information from the community science groups, which was not really possible before because of all the non-modern ways in which these data were held. So we modernized all those data sources and brought them together into the California harmful algal bloom monitoring system, which created a more comprehensive view for the state. So in addition to these projects, we have a community, a peer-to-peer community, peer-to-peer network community of practice, which has currently 145 members from 33 states. They're individuals. If we have one person in a state, we call it the state in. So don't think it's all state participation, but we have heavy participation in the West, and we're getting there in the East. We'd really like to do more in the East. These are people who work in state agencies managing water data. And what we're helping them do is follow the same protocols, the same standards. And that takes me to perhaps what is the beating heart of the Internet of Water, which is our new technology. The new technology that we offer, or are developing free open source technology for organizing water data into hubs. And we have, right now we have 4 hubs. the Western States Water Council for water use data, COWASI here in Boston for sensor data and data interoperability, the Water Data Collaborative for community science data. So those are 3 thematic hubs. And we have 2 geographic hubs, one in Texas, one in New Mexico. And what a hub does is it helps people aggregate and modernize their data. If you don't have high capacity to modernize your own data, you can push your data to a hub. You can just export your Excel spreadsheet. But what really we want you to do, if you can, is we really want you to publish your data to this new system, which we call GeoConnects, which is a search index for water data from all organizations. And what GeoConnects does is, like I said before, GeoConnects it's built on something created by the USGS called the National Linked Data Index, which is rooted, and I won't bore you with too many of these, in the National Hydrography Dataset. And so the National Hydrography Dataset is the nation's map of all rivers and streams. And so what we have done is we have created an index which will allow you to publish every piece of water data to that national map. So before GeoConnects, when you go to search for water data, you get a few relevant pieces of information, mostly a lot of irrelevant information. After, you will find all relevant sources of data for every geospatial location. That is the sort of beauty of the GeoConnects project, if we are able to succeed in sustaining it. So we've developed it. It's in a prototype phase. We've published about 3 million data sets to it already. It's very exciting. And because we all live in a video image, we used to be in a text-based age, now we're in an image-based age, and really a video-based age. And since a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a video is worth even more, I'm going to show you a video in a minute that illustrates GeoConnects. But finally, we're working with the federal government in these areas, partnering with USGS on this data discovery question, partnering with Department of Energy on hydropower data because of its importance. We're in dialogue with EPA about clean water data and utility data, and we have a federal roundtable that we manage to keep up this conversation. So again,
the Water Policy Program at the Duke
here it
University
is.
Nicholas
GeoConnects.
Institute created River Runner. With River Runner, users can drop a pin at any place in the United States. The app will then navigate to the closest river system and trace it downstream. River Runner is an application that allows users to visualize the datasets available along this river pathway. It is GeoConnects, developed by the Internet of Water, that makes the discovery of this data possible, because in GeoConnects, data is spatially referenced, linking it to real-world locations. In this demonstration, red points represent points of diversion. Green points represent USGS monitoring locations, and yellow points represent water quality portal sites. You can select a data point to see more information about it. Each link will direct the user to the data source's landing page. In some cases, the application will generate a graph. From this graph, you can also navigate to the data source's landing page. While this application is beautiful, it demonstrates something very powerful: the ability to bring together different data sets from different data sources in real time. Imagine being able to search for your local water source and seeing all data upstream and downstream from that source, being able to link directly to the data set source and download that data. This technology can transform how we access our water data and therefore how we manage our water.
All right, that is it. That was the voice of Dr. Ashley Ward at Duke University, who is the Outreach and Engagement Officer in the Duke University Internet of Water Startup Project. And she, Sam Lerner, developed that visualization for us. But the underlying technology that it showed is this GeoConnect system. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions.